Hi, I'm Laura Carmichael, the Executive Director of the Autism Alliance of Northeastern New York. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm here with Lisa Briscoe, the Board President, and she'll be doing the Q&A tonight, and also Hannah Provost. Thank you, Hannah, for speaking tonight. And thank you, Lomanto Provost, for co-hosting this series with us. So Hannah Provost is here tonight to talk about financial planning. Hannah is a registered representative of Securities America, an investment advisor representative of Securities America Advisors, a certified financial planner professional, and a chartered special needs consultant. So Hannah, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about our conversation tonight. I'd like to just start out by inviting everybody to use the chat or the question answer box to post any questions that you have that you brought to this session, anything that's been on your mind in terms of financial planning. And if it's not part of the presentation already and it's relevant, then we'll see if we can add it in. If it's something that's a little bit off topic for the group, then I'd be very happy to discuss it with you over the phone or by email. I am coming into this session not just because I took this as a professional interest. One thing you should know about me is that any of my professional interests really sparked from a personal curiosity. So I became a financial advisor in the first place because I looked at my own family, people that I know, and people that I worked with at a bank and said, wow, money has the potential to really make people very anxious, make people feel like they're always falling short, or just upset. It can really get into relationships. There must be a better way. And so that's when I really started down the path as a financial planner. Many years later, looking around at my own family, I am a mom myself of 3 kids who are each neurodivergent in their own way. And I said, what on earth do I need to do for this family of mine to plan for the future? And so anything that we talk about tonight really came out of personal experience. And I'm really happy to just kind of learn where you're coming from as well and how we can fit that in. Before we talk about money, though, I do want to really briefly go over the first 2 sessions that we had in this series. And they were recorded, and so soon you'll have the opportunity to go back and watch them if you haven't already. The first was about mindset. And one thing that Dr. Nancy Dawson said in that session was so telling for me. It was the difference between making a plan and trying to predict. So we all know we can't predict the future, no matter how hard we try. We don't have a crystal ball, but we can create a plan. So what's the difference? The difference is really looking at what we can do today in order to try to have a better positive outcome in the future. And then having faith that our actions today are a recipe for success going forward. So that's what we're talking about with financial planning too. We don't have a way to predict the future. There's a lot of curveballs that can be thrown our way, but we can control our actions today to try to have a positive outcome in the future. Session 2 was about life planning. Sarah Stone from Care Design did a great job talking about the aspects of a life plan, sometimes right down to whether the person likes to brush their teeth with hot or with cold water. I thought that was a funny example because I know that my kids would care about that. And so I think that the takeaway from that session, as it relates to tonight, is that we really kind of need to know where we're going or where we want to go in order to create this financial plan. So again, if you haven't had a chance to watch those sessions yet, I really encourage it. This whole series was created in a certain order because next week we're going to talk about guardianship. So this is still the planning aspect. Next week we talk about the legal steps that you might want to take with your family. All right, now we're going to talk about financial planning. So what is it? Financial planning is a 5-step process, And I think what's really important to remember about it is that it's a cycle. It's not linear. We're not going to go ahead and create a plan and have, a 100-page book that goes up on a shelf somewhere and then the plan is done. No, this is something that we're going to go through over and over and over again. We look to establish goals, identify resources, put those resources to work, hopefully towards those goals, right? Measure progress, and then do it all over again as our goals change, our resources change, and the environment around us changes. So what types of goals do I mean when I'm talking about financial planning? There could be lots of different goals. The most common ones that people will say to me explicitly when they come to my office is that they're concerned about retirement income. They may want to make sure that their estate is all buttoned up or that they're leaving a legacy behind, especially when they have a child with a disability. Or somebody who's going to depend on them for the rest of their lives, making sure that that person's going to be able to survive financially after they're gone. I'll hear about education. That's something that's often top of mind. And then there are two goals that I don't often hear people say explicitly, but once we get into the discussion, they're really, really important. And I think it's worth saying explicitly, this is something we want. One of them is stability. So that would go towards how your family handles an emergency, if there's an emergency fund in place, whether weekly or monthly cash flow is comfortable or not. Um, if you're having arguments with your spouse about cash or about money management, it's probably not comfortable. There's probably work to be done. And then debt management. So that stability piece is very important. And then also flexibility. So maybe you have your monthly routine down pat, it's no problem at all. But you know that if you were out of work for a little while, you would not be able to make the monthly cash flow situation work. Or maybe you feel like, okay, I can make this work now, but I could never, whatever it is, take a dream vacation. I could never start my own business. I could never afford to go part-time. That flexibility really speaks to what possibilities you've opened up for yourself in the future. And I want to zoom out for a minute. First of all, this is my family, so I'll give you a little chance to look at them. I always like to see them when I'm presenting to a group. It helps me calm my nerves a little. So this is my wonderful family. Whenever we're talking about a financial plan, you should be thinking of your whole family too. So every family member may have very different needs, and what's fair is not always what's equal, right? And that's completely okay. But what we don't want to do is be hyper focused on the person with a disability and what they need and then ignore the rest of the family. So I really want to have that front and center, that no matter what we're doing, even if we decide that so Susie or Johnny is okay, they don't need anything from me, let's make sure we're really making that evaluation and not just focusing on one family member. Another related topic, whenever we're doing a financial plan, as caregivers, it's really, really important that you have your own oxygen mask on first. So if you were to come into my office, I'm going to focus on your retirement plan before we talk about how do we set up a legacy for the rest of your family. Because if you're not stable and you don't have that flexibility to be able to branch out and do the things you want to do, I promise you're not going to be any good to your loved one who needs you, right? They need you to be okay. And so we're going to look at that first, making sure that the generation who's going to be retired first is financially stable before we try to shore up the next generation. So next we move on to resources. When I say resources, most people are going right to any existing bank accounts or retirement accounts, maybe a life insurance policy. They're going right to those tangible financial assets, something that you get a statement for. And those are definitely resources. I'm not here to say they're not. But we're also going to talk tonight a little bit more about other resources that a family might have available to them. Belinda, I see your question, and we are going to talk about that absolutely. So sit tight. So when we're talking about other resources, the first that I want to focus on is time. So oftentimes people will come to me and say, well, I'm only 5 years from retirement, or I'm already retired. I don't have time anymore. I challenge that. Most of the time, unless we're planning for a 95-year-old, there is time to work with. We just need to be really, really careful and clear about how we're allocating our resources. So segmenting what's a short-term resource, a medium-term, and a long-term. And the next is talents. If we're going through this financial plan and we find that there's some type of gap, how about monetizing some of those talents that you either aren't using or that you give away for free right now? So perhaps you're paying for caregiving right now, but there's another family like you who also needs respite from time to time. Maybe we can swap with them instead of having it be an expense to the household. Maybe you have some amazing craft that you love to make and people always compliment you on. They ask for it as their Christmas presents, but you're just doing it for fun. Consider whether that might be a money-making strategy going forward. So don't undercut yourself when it comes to either time or talents. The next is employer benefits, and we could have a whole night about employer benefits, so I won't linger too long on this topic. But I will say, please don't let that benefits package overwhelm you once a year at open enrollment time, and then you don't think about it the rest of the year. There is often a treasure trove of things that could be really useful to your family in there. Some of the ones that people don't always think about would be a dependent care flex spending account. There's nothing in there that says that the dependent has to be a minor. It could be that it's your adult child or a spouse or whoever's living with you that needs care while you're working. Legal assistance packages. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about a special needs trust, a legal assistance package. We just signed up for one in my family. It's $3 a paycheck. And oftentimes it can help take some of the sting out of those legal fees. And then fitness perks. So again, you can keep yourself healthy, you can keep your family members healthy, and an employee assistance program. I really, really recommend this, especially if you're not already going to some type of therapy on your own. This is almost like a therapy on demand or a short-term therapy program. And so that's something that may be free even that you can access when life just gets stressful and you really need someone to talk to. So don't overlook those benefits. I really like to look them over with people at like right before open enrollment if possible, so that you feel like you have a little bit of space and time to consider what you might need. All right, now we're going to get into government benefits, and this gets a little bit into the weeds. As we're going through, if you have questions, please ask them because somebody else is sitting there with the same question, I promise. So any questions you have here, please speak up. Government benefits can be broken down into federal benefits and state benefits. So when we think about federal benefits, most of those are run through the Social Security Administration. You have the Social Security retirement benefit that most people are aware of. You can claim that anytime between 62 and 70, and that might be a really important piece of your family's overall retirement plan. Then there's the separate Social Security Disability Insurance. This is SSDI. And this is an entitlement program. It's not a means tested program. So lots of jargon, leave it to the federal government. What an entitlement program is something that you or your family member has worked for. So SSDI is available to you if you have a work history. Generally, I think it's 2.5 years that you have to have of work history. Or for your adult child, um, and it only happens if there's a triggering event in your household. So say that I'm working and tomorrow I'm disabled. I might qualify for the disability benefit. My children might also qualify because I have had a disability. The other two triggering events would be that I retire or that I've passed away. So it's retirement, death, or disability, generally in this context of the parent when SSDI would kick in. Unfortunately, the other benefit is named almost the exact same thing, SSI. So I hear confusion all the time between SSI and SSDI. SSI is a means tested program. It's for people that are over 65, blind, or disabled and have limited income or assets. So it's not something that you necessarily have to have worked for. It's something that you have to qualify for based on your disability and very limited income and assets. And then I mentioned Medicare here because it's often tied to the SSDI. Not everybody will qualify for this. And that is really run on a federal level. If we go into state benefits, Medicaid, again, these names are so close to each other, you can't blame people for getting confused. Medicaid is not the same as Medicare. There is a big portion of it that's federally funded, but generally states are the ones that set the rules regarding Medicaid. Medicaid can be your best friend or your worst enemy. It tends to be a very generous health insurance provider, so it covers a lot of things that private insurance just can't or won't. And so Medicaid is wonderful if you qualify for it. When we're looking at it not as health insurance, but when we're talking about the waiver program, I think it's helpful to remember why the waiver program was set up. Decades and decades ago, most people that had autism or lots of other disabilities would have been institutionalized. And so this home and community-based service waiver was created to take that money that would have been spent on institutionalization and put it back into those families so that they can keep people home instead. So there are a couple of different agencies that are able to grant these waivers, but it does end up being Medicaid money that pays for those waivers, and if you qualify for them, they can have a lot of different uses. Sarah talked a little bit last time about person-centered planning and the self-direction program. So that, again, that's a whole nother topic, but when we're talking about government benefits and what we need to preserve, these are generally the benefits that we're talking about. We're going to have a whole section towards the end that talks about ABLE accounts and special needs trusts that are devices to preserve these benefits. But for now, just know these are what the benefits are. And then when we're wrapping up the resource discussion, one thing that's sometimes very difficult to do, but really crucially important, is looking at your family's resources. So it could be that you have a parent or an in-law or a sibling who, in a very well-meaning way, has gotten really close to your child who has autism and has said, hey, I'd like to provide for this person in my will. I really like them. I love them. I know that they're going to need some help in the world. And so I'm going to leave my estate to them. It's a beautiful sentiment that can completely shatter all of those benefit packages that we just talked about. And so have discussions with those family members about what they're planning for. I always find that it's best to approach things with just open-ended questions, a neutral tone, and say, hey, I was doing my estate planning. You don't have to share with me, but what are you doing with yours? And the reason I ask is because I learned from my financial planner or my attorney that I can't just leave things to Joey. It's going to disqualify him for government benefits. So having those conversations really uncomfortable. I think most families, it's the culture that money is something you just don't talk about, but it's really important to kind of go over that barrier. And then also think creatively about how you can support one another. So maybe you have a family member who couldn't live completely on their own, but they would be a great roommate for a sibling that also, for whatever reason, can't be independent or doesn't want to live alone. Maybe there's a family business where your loved one could be working. Who knows what it is, but just think really creatively about what you can do to support one another. And of course, it's a two-way street. So you want to be thinking about not just the benefit to your own immediate family, but to everybody involved. And then looking at community resources. Autism Alliance has a great resource page that you can start with. Calling 211 is another great way to be linked up with resources or getting in touch with the United Way. But don't discount the idea that the community may have something out there that you're able to access to fill in pieces of the plan. All right, now when the rubber hits the road, so we've identified the goals, we know what our resources are. How are we going to put those to work? There are 4 general categories that I put the work that I do into. So when I'm looking at a family and we know what we're going towards, I look at a couple things. Asset allocation. So that goes into what do you own? Is it cash? Is it stocks and bonds, or maybe mutual funds or exchange traded funds that own stocks and bonds? Do you own real estate? Do you own businesses, artwork? What is it? What is your asset allocation? And then a whole separate issue is your asset location. So not just what do you own, but how do you own it? Is it inside of a trust? Is it a joint account? Do you have beneficiaries? Is it part of an employer plan? All of that stuff, it goes into asset location. And in this country, our tax code sometimes has wild differences between how things will be treated with one ownership structure versus another. And so paying close attention to that asset location is really, really important. With those, we start to build up an accumulation strategy. So most of the time, most people that I work with, there's a set number of dollars that can be devoted every week or month or year towards building up wealth. Because as we all know, money doesn't actually grow on trees. And so once we know what that set dollar amount is, where the dollars will come from, then we can choose an accumulation strategy that's going to benefit you not just now, but into the future as well. And then the kind of cousin of that is the distribution strategy. So once you've done most of your productive money making work during your lifetime, we look at a distribution strategy. How are we going to draw from those accounts in a way that is tax efficient and is most likely to make the assets last for as long as they need to? This again gets really, really important when we talk about having a family member receiving government benefits. We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to preserve those benefits. And so a distribution strategy is really important here. So when we go back to those government benefits, we can't possibly cover everything about government benefits tonight, but there are a couple pointers here. So when we're talking about applying for disability benefits, generally you want to do that as soon as you're eligible to. And there's a reason for that. One is that you want to establish the disability early. You don't want any question about when it occurred. And medical records can certainly help with that. But it still helps to establish it early. And also, when a person turns 18 and they're newly an adult in the eyes of the law, they're kind of fresh and new, right? They don't really have a work history. They haven't built up assets. It's good to not give the government too much to look back on when we're talking about benefits like SSI or Medicaid. So definitely the sooner the better. There is a limit of $2,000 It's been that number for several years. It's not indexed up with inflation. $2,000 is the total amount that your loved one with a disability can have in their name and still qualify for SSI. The reason why SSI is such a big deal is that it's often tied to Medicaid as well. There are some workarounds to that in some cases, but for the most part, if you qualify for SSI, you're also going to qualify for Medicaid. And so it's so important to not do anything to disqualify yourself. So when we're talking about a person under 18, keeping their resources below $2,000 is really important so that when they have their birthday party, they've blown out 18 candles, and you go to the Social Security office to apply for benefits. There's not going to be anything in the way of that. And so what do? You don't want to just leave this person impoverished for their whole lives. What can we do in order to mitigate some of this? Actually, we're going to get into that slide. It's very meaty. And again, any questions you have as we go, please ask them. But before we even get into that, the first point I want to make is that you don't have to put any assets into a trust or to any type of account for your loved one before you die. You have the ability as a parent, a family member, a good friend to just pay for what you want to pay for and have the privilege of not paying for anything you don't want to pay for while you're living. And so all of these questions we're about to uncover are really more geared towards estate planning or planning for the person's own assets. But you as the parent don't necessarily need to make any of these changes while you're alive, although it may certainly make sense to go ahead and work with an attorney to have them lined up for your death. Okay, so there's a lot here, right? We're going to go through each of these one by one. I did want to have them all up at the same time, just so that you can reference, what's the same and what's different about each of these structures. The first is an ABLE account. So this is something that was only recently created. It was created in 2014. And it's meant to, it is part of the 529 law that has existed for a long time. The 529 law was first started as a college savings plan, and now it's been expanded to include saving for disability-related expenses. The criteria for who's able to open one, the disability must have occurred before age 26, and the person needs to qualify for SSI or SSDI, although not necessarily receiving those benefits. They just need to meet all of the criteria. Only one account like this can be established per person. So that's a big difference from 529s. If you have established a 529 college savings account for your child, your parent can go and establish one as well as a grandparent. You can have as many out there as you want. The ABLE account is not like that. There can only be one account per person. Only $15,000 total can go into these accounts every year. And at $100,000, there's a Medicaid payback, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. So generally, you want to keep these accounts under $100,000 total. Distributions from these accounts have to be for qualified disability expenses. That's not as restrictive as it sounds. So I think when people hear that, they think of like adaptive devices or any kind of therapies, things like that. It's not necessarily that restrictive. You would certainly want to look at the list of what's allowed before you go and create this account, because it really depends on you and your family, whether that will work for you. And then, as I mentioned, we do start to have a Medicaid payback on these accounts if it goes over $100,000. So what does that mean? This is going to come into play for the other accounts as well. And so we will certainly go over it. So a Medicaid payback means that the whole time that your loved one is receiving Medicaid services, Medicaid's keeping a tally. So every doctor's visit, every prescription, anything that they pay for, they've kept a tally this whole time. Eventually, hopefully way down the road, your loved one is going to pass away, and Medicaid will come and say, okay, we spent $74,000 on this person during their lifetime. Please pay us back. So that's what I mean when I say Medicaid payback. It does not mean that Medicaid has the ability to just go in and claim a whole person's whole estate. There are rules that go along with it. My understanding is that they don't include any interest, they don't have any inflation built into it. And so at the end of the day, they are paying for services that there's no other way to pay for often. And so that's just what the Medicaid payback is. It's, we could sit here and make judgments on it, but it is what it is. And it could come into effect with these 529 ABLE accounts. So we'll move on to the third party special needs trust. If you've heard of a special needs trust before, this was the type of trust that people are saying, oh, you need to get one of those. When we say third party special needs trust, it means that it was established for the benefit of a person with a disability and funded by someone other than the beneficiary. So it's not the Medicaid recipient's money going into this trust. It's money from literally anybody else, anybody except for the person that's actually receiving Medicaid. You do need an attorney to set up this trust, and it could happen while you're living. Sometimes that's called a living trust or an inter vivos trust. And in that case, you would fund it during your lifetime. Or you could also create a testamentary trust. What that means is that the trust only exists as a provision of your will. It's completely enclosed within your last will and testament. So to Belinda's question, yes, it can happen only after the parents are deceased. And then you would go through everything that you own that you want to leave to this loved one that has a disability, and you would name the trust as the beneficiary. Inside of this document, you also need to appoint a trustee, and it again can be anyone other than the beneficiary. I would really look very closely at who you name, because this person is going to need to have some knowledge of financial matters in general. How do you file a trust tax return, or pulling in the professionals that you would need to do that. But they're also going to need to have some knowledge of your loved one. So again, this is where that life plan really, really comes into effect. So we all want to think that it's going to be us that's taking care of our kids forever. That's not necessarily realistic. Who else is going to know all the information that they need in order to take care of your child or of your loved one? And if this is properly constructed, Medicaid has no claim on this money. So remember, this was your money. You have the ability to do anything you want with it. You could give it to your other children. You could give it to a charity. You could give it to a stranger. You can do whatever you want with it. You have not given it to the person who's receiving Medicaid. You've put it into a trust. And so as long as it's properly constructed, you don't have any worry of Medicaid coming and having a payback. And then because there's no payback from Medicaid, you get to name who the beneficiaries will be after the Medicaid recipient passes away. So in this case, you get lots and lots of control. You do need an attorney to create it, and there's some tax considerations and tax filing that you want to make sure that you're aware of. But when people say special needs trust, this is what they're talking about. The next type is a first party special needs trust. This is not the type of trust that someone was talking about when we were talking about, do I need a special needs trust? This is the kind that you'd only have by accident. So it could be that it's funded by somebody who had a sudden disability. So maybe I walk out of here and I have a car accident. I'm going to need Medicaid for the rest of my life. I could put my assets into a first party special needs trust. Maybe there's an inheritance. We already talked about that aunt or uncle that in a very well-meaning way, leaves money to your son or daughter with autism, an inheritance would have to go into a first-party special needs trust. Or maybe there's some type of settlement where a legal proceeding where it's actually the Medicaid recipient who is receiving money. That money, again, would go into a first-party special needs trust. So it's money that belongs to the person who's going to receive Medicaid. An attorney's still going to need to create the trust. But then it's also going to have to go through the court, and sometimes it's even monitored by the court or even by a social service agency. The trustee is not going to have as many choices in terms of how they spend the money because, again, it's monitored by the court. And at the beneficiary's death, Medicaid is going to request their funds back, but then any remainder can go to the family of the person who's passed away. So again, first party special needs trust is the kind you don't really want, but it's there as a last resort. And then the last one that we'll talk about tonight is a pooled supplemental needs trust. This is a mega trust. So it is set up by an organization that's statewide usually. And because it's already set up, what you're doing is just creating a sub account of that trust. It could be third-party funds or first-party funds. And some of the benefits are that the trust is already set up. You don't necessarily need to hire an attorney, although you may decide to anyway. And there are already professional trustees. So maybe you want to set up a third-party special needs trust, but there isn't anyone in your life that you would trust after you're gone to take care of this. That's when a pooled trust can really come into play. Some of the drawbacks, you may have little or even no control over the investments inside of the trust. And at death, a lot of different things can happen. It depends on the particulars of the trust, but it could be that the funds go back into the trust to pay for other families just like yours that are also members. If their funds are depleted, maybe there's a pool that is formed. Sometimes it goes back to Medicaid, or in some circumstances, it may go back to your family members. You may still be able to name beneficiaries. So again, this was something we could spend an entire hour on, just the trusts and the ABLE accounts. But this was a high-level overview of what we mean when we're talking about these different types of accounts. A lot of the ABLE account or the the ABLE account or any of these trusts could be constructed during your lifetime. But often it's a mechanism that you use in your estate planning, and it doesn't really spring into effect until you've passed away. So that's the gist of what we would be looking to do. And then I really can't state often enough that it's important to go back and measure and repeat it. Make sure that you know how the plan is working, and that you go through a new evaluation process every so often of, have the goals changed? Have the resources changed? Has the law changed? And we need to make a change for that reason. Make sure you're repeating this process. What I tell my clients is that I want to see them no less than once a year, but also whenever there's any kind of life event. So whether it's a marriage or a new job or anything along those lines, I want to make sure that we're looking at the plan and really making sure that if there's any changes that we're going ahead and making them, and that we understand the implications of the changes. So how do you go about actually creating a plan? It is something you can do yourself if you'd like to. I think that you have to have a certain interest in tax law and investments and all of that in order to do this well, but you don't need to be a cryptocurrency whiz or be, you know, a CPA or an attorney or anything like that in order to do this well yourself. You just need to have the patience to get through those 4 different things I talked about: asset allocation, asset location, accumulation, and distribution. If you don't want to completely go it on your own, there are some good resources. One that I would check with is your retirement plan provider. Ask them whether they offer financial planning because they may do it for free. They may do it at a discounted rate. But ask them what tools they have because they're thinking about how do we make this money last. So they're a great place to start. One thing I would not do, I would not just Google retirement calculator or um, legacy calculator, estate planning. I would not just trust the internet to point you in the right direction. But if you're looking for something that is more of a technology assisted, do it yourself way, I would look at your bank, credit union, or brokerage company software. So Fidelity or Vanguard, E-Trade, whatever you use. A lot of these places have a fairly good financial planning piece built right into it. They may be able to keep track of your accounts in real time, things like that. So that's often, again, a very expensive or even a free option for financial planning. And then the last is just to hire a financial planner. So there are a number of really great financial advisors right in town. Um, Technology has made it so that you can hire an advisor really anywhere in the country, meet with them virtually or over the phone. But some of the things that I hear people say about hiring an advisor is that they would, only they don't have $100,000 to invest, or they would, but they don't know even where to start. Just know that it's a very broad term, financial planner. Many advisors will work pro bono to some extent. Most will let you pay an hourly fee instead of having any money to manage. Um, Most will let you focus on the topics that are really most important to you. So, just any perceptions that you have about an advisor, just know that it's really opened up quite a bit. The industry and the profession are changing, and so there is an advisor out there who's a good fit for you if you want more of a directed approach to having a financial plan. And that is all that I have for tonight on the slides. Um, I do see one question here about 529s. So 529s is, like I said, split into two different sections. One is the college savings plan, and the other is the ABLE account. And which one you should be contributing to really, really depends on your own family situation. So it could be that, yes, you have a child with autism and they're going to college. So a 529 college account makes a lot of sense. One nice thing about the way it's been set up is that you can later roll over a 529 college savings account into a 529 ABLE account. So don't feel as though you have to draw a line in the sand and have one or the other. If down the road it makes more sense to have that ABLE account, you can roll it over later. The slides will be shared, so absolutely. Um, any other questions or comments?
So Heather, who wrote she already has a 529 for her 8-year-old autistic son, should she keep contributing or change it to a 529 able? Is there any age range that has to happen within, or is it any time?
No, so that's a great question. So an ABLE account is only for somebody whose disability occurred before age 26. But the account does not have to be set up before age 26. So no, there's not really a ticking clock on that. She can roll it over later when it becomes more clear whether it makes sense to use it for college or, 529 college accounts have been opened up a lot too. There's a lot of training programs, special high schools. There's just a lot more available now than there was before. So no, without knowing your individual situation, I would say that you could probably leave it in the 529 account and down the road convert it to an ABLE if it makes sense for your family.
Okay, wonderful. And in the Q&A section, Belinda wanted to know how to set up an ABLE account. Is that through the bank or through a financial planner, or?
It could be either. There are ABLE accounts set up all over the country. They're each administered by a state. They have to have a state sponsor. which can be confusing for people because they think, well, I need a New York account. That's not necessarily the case. So there's, um, tons of different ABLE accounts. You would want to find the one that makes the most sense to you. I can set them up as an advisor. I think some banks are able to do it, but it depends on what training they've had, what products they've decided to offer, or you can set up an ABLE account on your own. There's lots of different ways to do it.
Okay, thank you. And maybe you've already answered the next part of that question. Special needs trusts is set up under the will, but should the actual trust be created after the parents are deceased or set up the fund before? You've probably already
Right.
answered it, but if you could just clarify it for
I don't
everyone.
mind at all. Right. So if it's set up under your will already, then yes, the trust will be created after your death. The executor of your will and the trustee that you've named will work together with an attorney to make sure that happens. But you can always go back and just double check your plans. I would always make sure that the attorney that you had this set up with is still practicing. And as best practice, I would go and have that reviewed every 5 years or so and just make sure that all of the laws are still the same. There's no new curveballs that you need to be aware of. But you don't need to actually set it up and fund it before. You can if you decide that's what you want to do, but you don't have to.
Okay, very good. And I had a question. I didn't type it into the Q&A, but you mentioned early in the presentation that you currently pay $3 out of your paycheck each week for a legal assistance fund.
Yes.
Is that just like your own personal savings account, or is this a
No.
special program? I've never heard of this.
No. So the same way that you can get dental or vision insurance, you can get legal insurance. That could be used for a variety of different reasons. Usually they will have a legal or like an attorney network set up. And by having that opt in with your payroll, it could be that you have like free assistance with something like a power of attorney or a very simple will. Maybe it's discounted for more complex things. And that's something to talk to your HR department about. A lot of the time with benefits, they offer things as people ask for them. So maybe there's already a provision there that you just don't know about. Or maybe there's not a provision, but if they know that you want it, they're willing to add it. And so, yeah, asking for that legal insurance benefit is a great way to help mitigate some of these costs that come along with setting things up correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So I see Heather has a question about if grandparents want to give money to your son with autism. That's wonderful, right? What a great gift. So I would tell them that if he's receiving any government benefits right now, that you just want to make sure it's not going to impede on those government benefits. And because the grandparents are older than you are, they may need to go to their own attorney and set up either an ABLE account or a special needs trust. It really depends on their situation and how much money they're looking at. But have them go to their estate planning attorney with the idea in mind that your son's receiving government benefits and that we don't want to interfere with those.
Okay, and kind of along that same line, I also had a question that you said that the individual has a limit of $2,000 that can be in their name in order to get SSI or qualify for SSI. But once they're already qualified, is there still that $2,000 limit? Yes. So
That
that's
limit
like a
sticks
lifetime.
around. Yes.
Okay. That's
And
for the
so
life.
that's where ABLE accounts can really play in really nicely, because if they're working and earning their own money, they can deposit that to an ABLE account, have it not count towards the resource limit, and still have some ability to build up savings for whatever it is that they want. So yeah, that is a really tough thing to navigate, but that's the rule with SSI, $2,000 at application and all along the way.
Mhm.
I will put up my email again just for a moment. If anyone has any follow-up questions, I'm more than happy to chat with you. My phone number is also there. And then our website is up as well. We've got all kinds of resources on there about financial planning in general and financial literacy. But there are also some resources that are specific to a person with a disability. And so please use that website as a resource or get in touch with me.
Okay, thank you so much. We can see that on our screen. And Laura, I just wanted to invite you back in case you wanted to talk a little bit about next week's presentation. Laura?
Sorry, it took me a minute to click around my screen. So
Yeah.
yes, thank you so much, Hannah. That was excellent information. So I guess I should get started on this since my son's 20 now, right?
Never too late to start, right?
Right.
Start where you are.
Yeah. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And then, yes, Tara Ann Fleet will be here next Wednesday. She'll be talking about guardianship and its alternatives. So that's another thing I need to do. But thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you, Hannah. And thank you for co-hosting Lomanto Provost Financial Advisors. So hopefully we'll see you all next Wednesday. Take care. And Lisa, thank you so much for helping with the Q&A.
My pleasure. Thank you to you, Laura, and thank you to Hannah. We hope to see everyone next week.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.